Welcome to the HERHealth podcast, transforming health for women and girls at risk, where we empower women and girls to take charge of their health and well-being. Join us as we shine a spotlight on issues affecting women and girls' health and explore ways to create positive change. Get ready to be inspired and empowered as we discuss health, advocacy, and empowerment for women and girls at risk. Please be advised that this podcast may cover sensitive topics such as gendered violence. We understand that these discussions can be difficult to listen to. If you feel uncomfortable or need support, we encourage you to prioritize your well-being. Consider exploring our other podcasts if these topics are triggering for you. Resources can be found in the description.
Good morning and welcome to the AVA HERHealth podcast. My name is Jason Novick, the AVA webinar coordinator, and in today's episode, we're focusing on family violence within the context of family law and the critical role that screening and assessment play in protecting those at risk. Family violence is often complex, layered, and not always visible. Yet, for many families navigating separation and custody decisions, it has profound implications for safety, parenting arrangements, and long-term well-being. Despite this, it can be inconsistently identified or addressed within legal processes. We're joined today by Dr. Lisa Heslop, a research partner at the Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children, or CREVAWC, at Western University in London, Ontario. Dr. Heslop's work focuses on the intersection of family violence and family law, including how professionals can move from awareness to action through effective screening, assessment, and decision-making. In this conversation, we'll explore why screening for family violence is essential, what can make it challenging in practice, and how tools like eSafer Assessment Guide can support more informed, trauma and violence-informed parenting plans that prioritize the safety of children and survivors. Dr. Heslop, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
And I'd like to thank you for your excellent presentation at the AVA webinar Wednesday series recently. And to begin, I'm wondering if you could share what led you to focus your work on the intersection of family violence and family law.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Jason. I've worked in the area of gender-based violence my whole career in one capacity or another. I worked for a police service for 30 years, just shy of 30 years, supervising a team of trauma workers who responded to specific kinds of crises that happened, as you can imagine, within police work. And but even though that was a wide range of different kinds of situations and crises, half of the work, or more than half of the work, involved gender-based violence. I began working in the family legal system about 15 years ago, conducting parenting assessments and voice of the child reports, working alongside lawyers who represent children. I joined the team at CREVAWC as a research partner about 5 years ago, and there I'm leading co-leading projects related to family violence and family law. And around the same time, the Divorce Act was amended to require the court to consider the nature, severity, frequency of family violence and its impact on children and the parent who experienced violence, among other things. And this was hugely significant. At CREVAWC, we had began working with our alliance partners under Peter Jaffe's leadership to address gaps in knowledge and skills in this area, and had begun to amass this library of resources for family law professionals. And professionals, I mean lawyers, assessors, advocates, and survivors. So from awareness to action was sort of the logical next step. People in the field were needing resources to help them assess best interests criteria when they were creating parenting plans, and understanding, the family violence that had occurred in a more nuanced way, both during and after the separation, children's level of involvement in that family violence, its impact, and any parenting concerns, ongoing safety and concerns, and evidence of change in the parent who'd used abusive behaviors. So eSafer built on that work that we had previously done, especially work also that was done by the Battered Women's Justice Project and the Department of Justice Help Toolkit. And we worked with experts across the country including those with lived experience, to create the guide.
Thank you so much for describing your career path and how it led you to your current position with CREVAWC and the important work that you've been undertaking within the realm of gender-based violence. And along the lines of e-safer, as you have just described, I'm wondering why early and consistent screening is so critical in family litigation contexts, given that screening for family violence is often described as the first step.
For sure. Family violence, as we know, doesn't end at the point of separation, especially in high risk cases, those cases involving coercive control. And we know that the time of separation from other research is the highest risk time for the most serious family violence, including lethal violence. And especially during family litigation, it involves very high stakes decisions about how, or in some cases, if the children are going to move between their parents' homes, division of family assets, and such. So screening for family violence is critical in that context. And survivors are more likely to disclose what's happened and happening if you ask. So this allows the lawyer or assessor or other family law professionals to be able to identify the risks, keep track of the level of danger as the case goes on, because we know that risk is dynamic. It can change quickly during family litigation in response to changes in the family's circumstances. Or, for example, there's an order that comes out and it limits one parent's parenting time, or it deals with some distribution of the family assets. Or it could happen outside of the court context as well. If a parent, for example, starts dating or meets a new partner. So it's really important for people who are working with both the parent who has been experiencing family violence and the parent who has used family violence to continue to screen for risk. And I am a big fan, as you know, and I've heard, of standardized screening, because it embeds the process into daily practice of those family law professionals. It gives them language to start a conversation about family violence early on in the proceedings, and also some insight into how their client has been impacted by their experience of family law, and get them starting to think about how risks can be addressed throughout the process.
Absolutely. And thank you for explaining the importance of early and consistent screening within family litigation contexts. And despite the importance, as you just described, screening does not always happen. And what do you believe are some of the common barriers or hesitations that prevent legal professionals from screening for family violence?
Well, asking about family violence can feel really intrusive and uncomfortable, especially for professionals who haven't done a lot of it. And they may think that it's uncomfortable or intrusive for the client, or they're, in some cases, maybe they're going to make the client situation worse if they ask. We also hear from some professionals that screening feels like outside, particularly lawyers, outside of their scope of practice, and that it's a job that's better handled by a social worker, for example. I think the other thing is that they don't maybe are not familiar with screening tools. They don't have, or feel like they don't have the ability or skill to ask the questions or handle a disclosure. We know that screening is great, but it needs to be followed by action that accounts for the risk factors. So they don't feel like they have that expertise or connections in the community. It makes screening very uncomfortable. But all that to say, we know from the literature and from our experience that if you ask about family violence, the chances are that your client will begin to tell you about their experience go up. And, for those clients who are most at risk, those clients who are really afraid, have been made to be afraid of repercussions of disclosing from their former partner, are often the ones who are most reluctant to initiate the conversation.
Absolutely. And so accordingly, that you have promoted the importance and benefits associated with screening for family violence, which is possible with standardized screening measures for example, legal professionals who are not trained as social workers. And I'm wondering along those lines, what role do structured screening tools for family violence play in improving consistency and safety in these processes?
Mm, thank you. Yes. As I said, I'm a big fan of standardized screening tools. And there's a number of reasons for that. First of all, it normalizes the conversation for professionals and for the client. Allows you to say things, begin your interview with your client by saying things like, I want to ask you a few questions that I ask all my clients about family violence. And I ask these questions because understanding what, or if any, family violence occurred in the relationship will help me understand your experiences and how I can better support or represent you. Um, it also doesn't, if you have a standardized process or a standardized tool, it also doesn't rely on individuals' level of knowledge. So it levels the field as far as all of that is concerned. And most of those protocols are built to also encourage professionals to work collaboratively with their community partners in order to conduct safety planning or risk assessment if a client discloses and it's not within your scope of practice.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for explaining in further detail the important roles of structured screening tools for family violence. Moving beyond screening, your work also introduces the eSafer assessment guide. And I'm wondering if you could explain for the Her Health podcast audience what this tool is and how it supports professionals in making safer parenting plan recommendations.
Yes, definitely. Our federal and provincial and territorial laws all outline how family violence should be considered when assessing best interests of the children after parents separate. And there's some variation in our laws across the country, but mostly they align on what family violence is, or on a definition, and how it's relevant to creating parenting plans. So the eSafer, it is set out to help family professionals gather all the necessary information to assess the best interest criteria in their jurisdiction for whatever legislation they're using. So it animates based on the legislation that you choose, either federal legislation, the Divorce Act, or any of the provincial or territorial statutes. And the guide then walks the users through a structured process to ensure that they're gathering all of the information they need, and then organizes that information into the best interest criteria from the legislation they selected. So either the danger assessment, the Divorce Act, or the provincial or territorial statutes. So for example, it helps the user consider the client's individual circumstances, like things that could be barriers to the legal system, or something that could be manipulated by a forcibly controlling former partner, or it could be a source of strength and resilience. For example, if their client is isolated, or they have a trauma history, or they have had experiences with discrimination in interacting with systems, or maybe they live with problematic substance use. What we want to make sure is that those things are surfaced early in the assessment, in order that the user can have that perspective, that overarching perspective of their client's situation, and what things they need to build in to help both the courts understand better and to protect the children.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for explaining the importance of the eSafer assessment guide in supporting professionals to make safer parenting plan
Would you
recommendations.
would you like me just to walk through some of the highlights of the guide, Jason?
Absolutely. That would be great. Yes.
Okay, so it starts off talking about the parenting relationship, and which is about the couple's ability to communicate, to problem solve, to step back and prioritize the children's interests. And then it goes through all of the sections of the best interest test, the nature of the family violence, the children's level of involvement in what's happened. Is there coercive control present in this case? The impact of all of the violence on the children and on the survivor parents' parenting, as well as safety concerns related to the children, parenting concerns, and the efforts of the parent who's used abusive behaviors to change. And it provides help in each of those sections. Why is this a criteria important to building a parenting plan? Gives us a brief summary of the current literature, things to listen for while you're interviewing your client, a list of factors to consider that we know are related to increasing danger, those factors are derived from the domestic violence the Domestic Violence Death Review Committee top 20 factors that would signal potential danger, ongoing danger. And it also provides a section for safety planning. And at the end, the assessment of the information has been gathered. It's all downloaded into a summary and presented at each of those areas of concern aligning with the corresponding best interests of the child criteria. And the guide also provides some considerations for what to do and how to address those concerns in a parenting plan recommendations. So that's it in a nutshell. It's quite an interactive guide, and I think it's been getting some really great feedback from users.
Thank you so much for explaining in detail the importance of the eSafer assessment guide for professionals, along with the feedback that you have received. And I'm very appreciative for how you have highlighted this as an imperative resource to support professionals in developing safer parenting plan recommendations. And I'm also wondering, and as you're aware with AVA, that we have disseminated how family violence can take many different forms, including coercive control. I'm wondering, how can professionals better assess the nature, severity, and patterns of violence in a way that reflects survivors' lived realities?
Mm-hmm. You spent a lot of time developing the section on eSafer that addresses coercive control and how you assess it. But I would say overall, first by asking about it. But I think also how you ask the questions are as important as the questions that you ask. So here, trauma and violence informed practice will help the users understand their client better, because oftentimes the system approaches family violence survivors as one sort of block of folks, and everybody gets the same treatment and everybody has the same needs. And that's not the case. We know that there's a lot of overlapping and intersecting issues that our clients work with, live with. So building rapport, I think, is the most important first step. Taking time, making sure that you have the time to go through and ask the questions in a way that doesn't feel rushed, in a way that doesn't feel pressured, and that responds to your client's time pace that they're comfortable with. And also, I think the importance of creating a safe environment. And that can look differently for different clients. In some cases, it might mean that an office setting isn't the place to go through and conduct this assessment. Maybe it means that you meet someplace that's more comfortable for your client. And you organize the space physically to make it more welcoming, depending on who your client is. I think setting aside the time is a big one. And then recognizing the impact of their experience. So not misunderstanding that when clients can't get the documents back to you in time doesn't indicate that they're uninterested in the proceedings, but rather this is something that maybe is being expressed, one of the ways that trauma is being expressed in their life. If you understand those things, you'll see your client through a different lens, and one that's much more helpful. I think too, paying close attention to the risks and the dynamic nature of family litigation, as we've already talked about. And if this is outside of your realm of work, then work collaboratively. This is not work, as we know, that should be done alone. The more people that are involved, the more support that your client can have is going to ultimately make them safer. So being aware of what resources are in your community, how to connect to them, what are their intake practices, and what things do you need to take care of in order to get them connected. Sometimes it means taking them in there or being present during that first introductory interview. That might be required for some clients who have had bad experiences with systems in the past. So ask, I think, is the first thing. Ask about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for describing the multifaceted ways in which professionals could better assess violence in order to reflect survivors' lived realities and conceptualizing how violence can undertake different forms, such as coercive control. This is very informative for the AVA audience. Thank you. And I'm also wondering, in cases of family violence which involve children, to help determine the best interests of the child, how should the impact of family violence on both the child and the non-offending parent be meaningfully incorporated into decisions?
This is something that people struggle with, this next step around how do we do that. I think always the guiding principle is to prioritize safety and to make sure you're building guardrails around specific risks. And backing it up for the importance of assessing the risk, knowing what are those factors that need to be accounted for in the safety plan to make sure that there's some guardrails or protection around those risks. I think, also identifying and protecting the children from situations that can provoke conflict or danger. Like some of the common ones are transitions when children are moving between their parents' homes or when their parents are physically present in the same space. Those can be high risk situations for children. High risk of it being exposed to more family violence, which we know is very impactful and can have lifelong consequences for children. I think too that we need to understand that the things that keep children safe are the same things that keep the survivor parent safe. That children require a safe and well parent who is there and present and able to focus on them. And the things that make them in danger, put them at risk of being harmed, are the same things for the children. There's not much difference. In parenting plans, we also too want to build in opportunities for healing. So it could be counseling, it could be therapy for the parent who's used family violence or a bunch of different factors, whatever they may be. Refrain from using alcohol or drugs when the children are present and things like that. Once you have an understanding, you can make a very individualized plan about what healing would actually look like for that parent and set benchmarks that are observable and are related to any incremental changes. So you would need to see these behaviors, for example, before there are any changes to the parenting plan. And one thing I think sometimes people struggle with is that children have their own timeline around healing. And a parent can sit back and say, okay, maybe the parent who's used abusive behaviors can sit back and say, okay, well, it's been 6 months now. The child has been in therapy. Things should be able to move forward, but the child's not there yet. And part of demonstrating change on the part of the parent who has used abusive behaviors is to recognize that, to understand that children have their own pace, and to support the child, whatever that looks like for that child. And sort of hand in hand with that is to respect the child's voice, not automatically or reflexively, which sometimes happens, say, well, the child is being programmed or coached, and so their opinions that they're expressing are not their own, when most cases that's not true. Also respecting the children's interests and relationships. But sometimes what that looks like is that children are permitted to go to family gatherings regardless of whose parenting time it's at, honoring the relationship that that child has with their family members. So there's some of the things. There's some very great resources out there. A paper that was written by Peter Jaffe, Nick Bala, Katrina Scott, and Archana. They have it's posted on the Department of Justice website. I encourage you to take a look at it. It has a very long and nuanced answer to your question.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for describing in detail the ways in which, in considering the best interests of the child, how the impact of family violence on both the child and the non-offending parent could meaningfully be incorporated, along with your recommendation for the manuscript, which provides valuable insights in this regard. And finally, to conclude the podcast, that I'm interested, as a way of synthesizing all of your insightful responses, would be a policy recommendation specifically for those working in family law. What is one key shift in practice or mindset that you hope listeners take away from this
Mm,
conversation?
It's such a good question. It's hard to pick one, but I think, if I was to pick one, I've heard some family law professionals miss the relevance of family violence to the issues of parenting. For example, suggesting that while the parent who used family violence may not have been a good partner, they're still a great parent. And there is a large body of literature that clearly concludes that factors that increase risk for the survivor parent also increase risk for the children, and that there's a large overlap between family violence and child maltreatment. One Canadian study recently reported 70% of adults who said they witnessed family violence as children also reported that they experienced physical or sexual abuse, and they were at the highest risk for severe forms of abuse. Now, other studies have found that children living with family violence are at least 5 or 6 times more likely to be abused. So families referred to, if you look just at the population of families who are referred to Child Protective Services, the presence of family violence at intake predicts allegations of abuse and neglect. So they're inextricably wound together. And all that to say is, I guess, my one key message would be, we screen and assess for family violence and family litigation so that we can create parenting plans that forefront the safety of survivors and their children. That has to be our priority. There's some really wonderful work done by Janet Johnson. I'm not sure if you've had a chance to look at it, but it's wonderful because it's simple. And it's something that in this field we struggle with because there's conflicting priorities, in safety plans. And she said that, where we always want to go for all 5 of these things, but if you can't, if it's not possible, then always first should come protecting the safety of the children. And then that's followed by protecting the safety and support of the survivor parent's well-being. And respecting, that the right of adult survivors to direct their own lives, followed by holding the parent who used family violence accountable for their behavior. And then, lastly, allowing the children parenting time with both parties. So it's a way of conceptualizing that makes super clear where we start, what we aim for, and then how we work through to, hopefully, in most cases, the parenting time is provided for both parents. And so I think that would be my number one switch in practice, that we're asking about the family violence, and then we're being clear that it is inextricably linked to the well-being of children.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for your emphasis on this key policy recommendation that you hope that listeners take from this conversation regarding the importance of considering the well-being of children within family violence contexts, especially given these notable trends within the realm of family violence that you have mentioned. So I'm very appreciative for your time today, and thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights regarding the assessment of family violence in family litigation and explaining the importance of screening and the important work that the eSafer assessment guide represents within the realm of safer parenting plan recommendations, and also explaining the importance of considering how family violence can undertake many different forms. So thank you so much for your time today and sharing your valuable
Yeah.
insights.
My pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for joining us on the HERHealth podcast, transforming health for women and girls at risk. Remember, your health matters, and together we can make a difference. Until next time, remember to prioritize your health and well-being. For more resources and support on issues affecting girls, women, and gender-diverse people, visit our website at avatraining.ca. This is Dr. Nicole Letourneau. Thank you for listening.